Okay, let's say hello. All right, good morning. Hello, it's me. This is the live stream for ENGL 386, the graphic novel class, and I am the Professor Zach Whalen. Today I'm going to be talking about Nat Turner by Kyle Baker, which is our book for the week in this class. But just a couple of random things first. Well, this first one's kind of random, but a couple other things that I do want to talk about and make sure students that you're getting ready for. Yeah, hey Sid, good to see you on the stream. So yeah, like Sid and Arrow are doing, and Claire, good morning. Crelia, good to see you all. Don't forget to say hi on the Discord channel so I know who's watching. Looks like many of you are, so that's great. So I hope you all had a good weekend. I don't know if you had a chance to do anything like trick-or-treating, but I shared this with a couple of you, and I think I put this in Discord, but I don't remember. But this was my I guess weekend project for trick-or-treating, and I thought I'd share some of the results. I made this, as I called it, the trick-or-yeeting setup. A torsion catapult is what this is called, and this was my prototype, this was. I didn't realize it was a prototype when I made it. I had to improve it beyond this, it turned out not to do very well. So I got about 15 feet with this one. Also, the trigger mechanism was kind of dangerous, I found out, because it hit me in the knee pretty hard, and I was, I didn't want my kids to experience that. So I worked on it a little bit, and I was trying to figure out, do I need more tension? Do I need more more rope, longer rope? I tried a different rope and it broke. So then I realized, well, maybe the issue is actually the launcher arm. And I did some experimenting. This was just a test with a prototype. I found some PVC, worked pretty well. I got a lot farther with this, but the PVC you can kind of see is sort of bending. And so I realized, I need something better. So my final form, this is the final form here, and you can kind of see let me show you my video of it. Whoa, I didn't mean to go full screen. But so it's a broom handle, and then I ran it through the torsion rope thing, and then I bolted a dustpan to the top for the to hold the payload, I guess, and then did some pool noodle foam kind of stuff on the crossbar and on the launcher arm, so it's kind of acts as a silencer, but it also keeps the broom handle from bending, because it would hit that crossbar so hard that it was actually denting it and starting to bend. So I padded that, and I could consistently get about 30 feet with this, and it varied. Sometimes it was more like 20, sometimes it was more like 40, but it was able to position it so it launched at the end of my driveway, and I set up kind of a target zone with the incoming there and then the launcher. And it launched pretty high, so a good 25 feet up in the air. So kids had a good chance to try to catch it if they were paying attention. Not all of them were paying attention or understood what was happening. And then the candy kind of landed at their feet. None of them, as far as I know, I don't recall. I mean, it was dark, so I'm not sure, but I don't think any kids were hit by candy. They mostly just missed it. And I also, in my experimenting, I found that certain candy, as I expected, certain candy did not survive very well, didn't hold up very well to landing on the ground. So I was particularly concerned about M&Ms. I don't think they held up very well. I was surprised that Skittles even kind of shattered, which Skittles I feel like are pretty tough, but they didn't do that great. But that said, the Skittles bag I was inspecting, I had launched it probably 30 times in testing. So maybe just after that many times, anything is gonna break down. Kit Kat just shattered into dust. So it's interesting how now Milky Way probably held up the best, and so I think maybe next year. Of course, I'm going to do this next year. Milky Way held up pretty well, so I might do Milky Way. I ran out of candies early. I had 60 or so packages ready, and ran out before I ran out of trick-or-treaters, so I had to say no to some people. So next year, maybe a bit more. You never know in our neighborhood. Like last year, I think I gave away I just had 30 or 40 visitors total last year. But this year, I don't know, it was a bit more popular. I don't know why. Okay, cool. So that was just my weekend update. Let's see. Yes, Rose Tyler, I am also feeling that existential crisis, but here we are, and something will be different by the end of the week. So we'll see. Hopefully, we'll know something by the end of the week, maybe even tomorrow. The other thing I wanted to check in before getting into Nat Turner is the comics, and I have not checked on them today, so I've been getting ready for the Nat Turner stuff, so I want to see how y'all are doing. I like the layout. I like the big circle in the middle. There's similar, I don't know if you're referencing this on purpose, but there's a similar Little Nemo comic page that has a big circle in the middle like that. So, yeah. I mean, kind of dark. I mean, your comic is getting pretty intense here. Good. Let's see. How's Halloween? I haven't seen them today. Whew, I'm cold. This room does not have heat in it, and this is the first morning where that's been a real problem. So I need to find the space heater. I could not find the space heater this morning. Oh, a candy slingshot. Yes. Yes. I can see where this is going. Well, that was a fail. Yeah. At least the candy hit the tree, not the children. Yes. Although the children, I mean, they're not going to mind. The kids that I threw candy at, mostly thought it was hilarious. Like they were, or their parents did. At least it was pretty fun. But yeah, slingshots. I think the issue, as the Hallows are discovering here, with the slingshot is that it's a more line drive kind of thing. Whereas with the catapult, when I got it, tweaked right, it's a nice parabola. Like it was a nice launch. So that gave the kids a chance to catch it, and a few did. Very few, but some of them certainly did catch it. But yeah, I'll be interested to see what else they come up with. Oh yeah, Penny and Poe. I think they are done, right? I think Penny and Poe were planning to wrap up today. So yeah, it looks like they've gone on to Stuck Rubber Baby. So, oh boy, I'm trying not to shiver too much, but it's probably it feels like it's in the 40s out here, and I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt for some reason. Oh yeah, Jones. Serious. Yeah, this is really serious artwork. Cool. I'm gonna have to check that out. Spend some more time with it later. Let's see what Atlas is up to. Strain against the storm. This is so dramatic. Such epic, language. I'll get a sweater later. The thing with the sweater is it doesn't, the collar lets me clip this on here, So that's, the sweater doesn't have the same space. I'll be okay. Root of all evil. Toy Story with plants. There's some real tension in this story too, like some real domestic tension, I think. So interesting. Please don't leave. Really? Okay. I like the puns, but a budding relationship. Yeah, I see it. There's so many options, right? So many options with the plant-based puns. All right, so today and this week we're talking about Nat Turner by Cal Baker. And so what I wanted to do today is introduce the book a little bit and also the history, because this is a true story, and so I wanted you to understand a little bit about the true history, the real story of the Nat Turner Rebellion. This is a semi-local, I guess, regional history as well, so I think there's an interesting angle on it. One just kind of minor but interesting thing I found when I was looking at examples is, I don't know if I have the tab. I have so many tabs. I've been doing so many tabs. Let's see if I can find it here. It was on genius.com, and there it is. Yeah, so Chance the Rapper has a song where he references the Nat Turner Rebellion. So this is the song How Great, and he has this line, Hosanna, Santa invoked and woke up slaves from Southampton to Chatham Manor. And his annotation that he added here explains that this is a reference to Nat Turner's slave rebellion in Southampton County and a smaller rebellion in Chatham Manor right after Christmas. And so, as I hope you're aware, Chatham Manor is right across the river from Fredericksburg. It's basically in Fredericksburg, technically South Stafford County, very close to where I am currently, and certainly a place I've been before. Chatham Manor is it's still standing. It's a building that is quite old and was there during the Battle of Fredericksburg in the Civil War. was a hospital. Walt Whitman worked there when it was a hospital, so it's a pretty historic place. And also there was a slave rebellion in there in 1805, I found out. The way it's written here, it almost sounds like the Chatham Manor Rebellion was inspired by Nat Turner's, but they were not related chronologically. Nat Turner's was 1831, and the Chatham Manor event was 1805. It was a much smaller event, from what I gather. And there's information on the Chatham Manor's, the National Park Service website about Chatham Manor, where it explains that the overseer or whomever was in charge of keeping the slaves working, he wanted them to work to kind of end their Christmas vacation early, and they didn't want to, and they tied him up and beat him with whips. I believe a couple of them ended up being executed, although one of them died attempting to cross the Rappahannock. The Rappahannock River was frozen over, but he attempted to run across it. The ice broke and he fell through and drowned. So it was a smaller scale event, but certainly, I mean, noteworthy enough to record in history. So I think it's interesting, and it also connects us here. I mean, when we talk about U.S. history, Virginia history, we're kind of right in the middle of it here in Fredericksburg. So it's something that I think helps understand and appreciate these events a little bit better when we can kind of picture the exact geography and landscape where these places, where these events took place. So, yeah, so cold. But let's talk about Nat Turner. As you can see, tons and tons of tabs here. Okay, I have a slide about this too, but since I have this tab up, let me just sort of explain what we're talking about. So this takes place in the Nat Turner Rebellion takes place in Southampton County, which if I search it here, it's going to highlight Southampton. Yeah, so it's this area here. This is obviously Southeast Virginia. Thanks, Rose Tyler. I'll be okay. So this is kind of, it's sort of the triangle between Petersburg and like Chesapeake area, and it's kind of the bottom of that. So it's about the same distance from Chesapeake and Petersburg. So it's kind of in the middle of farmland. It's a place that you may have driven through. I've driven through a few times, mostly on 95, and you kind of just look out and there's just farms and pretty much nothing. A couple times I have taken a highway through here for some reason, for a shortcut or something, and it's pretty empty. I feel like it's very much just lots of farmland, and there's not a lot of cities there. The city in question, and again, we can look at this in more detail later, but Nat Turner's place of birth is Jerusalem, Virginia, which is now called Cortland, and you can see it here. It's a pretty small little town, and I was looking at things on Street View. This is so you can kind of take a look at it here. It's just a very typical small rural kind of town, in Virginia. Like, happens on many highways. If you go off the interstate, many times you'll be taking a highway for a while, and then you'll come across a tiny little downtown, maybe with one or two red lights. In this case, a railroad crossing, and a couple hardware stores and a church, and that's about it. That's usually. This looks like any number of maybe dozens of little towns like this in Virginia, but this one is quite old. It goes back into the 18th century, and it used to be called Jerusalem, but in the late 19th century it was changed to Cortland, and I'm not sure why. I guess we'd have to ask somebody from that area. So let's see. Let me go over to my slideshow here and start at the beginning. All right, so let me see. I'm going to actually do it this way. Where do publish to the web and publish, yes. Copy and its own tab. Take the auto thing off. Here we go. All right, great. So Nat Turner, and we're reading a book by Kyle Baker about Nat Turner. It's not even actually about Nat Turner. It really is Nat Turner's story, and that's something to keep in mind as you read it. There are very few words in it, but the words that are in it are not Kyle Baker's words. These are words from Nat Turner himself and a couple of other sources. So this is almost biography, almost Nat Turner, an illustrated autobiography of Nat Turner, really, more so than a book about Nat Turner, if that makes sense. But of course it is a book about Nat Turner. Of course it is a book by a modern 20th century, 21st century person, Kyle Baker, who is an artist. So Kyle Baker is an artist. I wanted to say a little bit about him. Very acclaimed, very talented in terms of he does like caricature work, illustrator kind of work. He's done mainstream comics, he's done cartoons and all kinds of things. You can see a bit of his style over here kind of behind him. Those are examples of his artwork. And here's a couple more titles that he published actually around the same time. So Nat Turner was 2006, so he was also at the same time working on Plastic Man for DC. And it's a very silly kind of style. It sort of reminds me of kind of like the late SpongeBob and maybe Ren and Stimpy kind of comics, very exaggerated, very, very cartoony, very rubberized kind of people. He also did this comic, Special Forces, which you can see is this woman on the cover with guns. It was meant to be a work of political satire about U.S. involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan. A very controversial book, I guess. I mean, I don't know if people were that upset by it or what, but just kind of reading about it, it seems like his goal was to offend as many people as possible. And so I think he may have accomplished that. I don't know. But it doesn't seem to be that widely talked about. It just was a book that is very offensive if you read it. So I don't necessarily recommend it. I just want you to see his range of style as an artist. Like he can make things very cartoony, very silly, also very realistic in terms of shading and so on. But in terms of like this woman's body, obviously it's quite exaggerated. And this is the kind of overly sexualized image that we talked about Kamala Khan being an exception to. And we talked about like the Hawkeye Initiative. This is the kind of image that would appear on the Hawkeye Initiative. This is, in the context of the book, if I remember, from what I gather, this woman, I don't know her name, but she's the only character drawn this way. Everyone else is drawn in different kind of cartoony ways. But she's meant to be a satire. I don't know how well that satire comes across, but that was the intent, I suppose. Okay, so let's talk about Nat Turner. And this is another image. I like this image because it shows up on many of the different histories I looked at about Nat Turner. This was an engraving by William Henry Shelton, and the year for this engraving was not, it was not specified. Like I couldn't find it specified anywhere, although it was published in a book in 1882. So it was sometime before that probably. Obviously, this was an engraving. And I think it's interesting if you look at this image. So this is not exactly contemporaneous. This is up to 50 years after the rebellion. So this is telling a story that people knew about and to some extent, and kind of depicting this historical event. So even though it's closer to the original event than we are, it is still a history of the event. And it's kind of interesting if you look at the posture of these two individuals. This is Nat Turner on the left. All of the accounts do record that he was captured with a sword, and so you can see him with a sword there. You can see the farmer who caught him, Phipps, on the right there. And but I think what's interesting if you look at him is if you look at Nat Turner's face here, there's an element of danger, almost of nobility about his posture, but like very dangerous expression. And yet he's almost calm and beatific in accepting his fate. He did surrender without a fight once he was discovered, and so that's what we're seeing here. He's holding onto the sword, but according to the accounts, he immediately threw it down and allowed himself to be captured and then taken to jail. But anyway, we'll talk a bit about the actual circumstances. You'll read about them in the book. But I just thought this was an interesting and really the earliest visual, I guess, record or version of Nat Turner that I could find. There might be others, but this was the one that comes up a lot in different stories about it. So here's a bit about the setting. I just kind of talked about that already. And this is the area where I just zoomed in Google Maps, this area in Southampton County, which is, it's a county between places. Like it's a county that, I don't know, it's just not a lot there. But obviously there are people there. It's just not as many. It's very, very rural, very agrarian still. In the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, it was plantations. It was farms. It was a majority black area in terms of population, but those black people who were there were enslaved. So it was like many other very rural areas in Virginia and North Carolina. It's very close to the North Carolina border, and so whenever we talk about the story of the response, response or the wave of panic that occurred throughout the region. Also, it was very Virginia-based, but also North Carolina-based. Like both Virginia and North Carolina were affected and responded to the rebellion. So we'll talk about that a little bit. So here's that image again. This is that I showed you like a slightly different version of that engraving. So let's take a look at it in the context. This is a book from 1895. So again, this is the history, and I think this is interesting because this tells us this is like a history book written in the late 19th century. And I'm always interested in how people tell stories, like how the telling of a historical event has changed over time. So that's, I guess, historiography. And this is pretty interesting. So a couple lines here. One of these insurrections. So this is a chapter about the slavery controversy, as it says here. One of these insurrections was the event of 1831 in Virginia, originating near the southern border. 4 slaves, in alliance with 3 whites, commenced it by killing several families and pressing all the slaves they could find into their service. Until the force was nearly 200, they spread desolation everywhere. 55 white persons were murdered before the insurrection was in hand. Virginia and North Carolina called out troops, and at last all the insurgents were captured or killed. The leader was a black named Nat Turner, who believed himself called of God to give his people freedom. He had heard voices in the air and seen signs in the sky, which, with many other portents, he interpreted as proof of his divine commission. Now, these are details that were known because Nat Turner's confessions were published. It was a document, it was a pamphlet, it was something that people read and you can still read. And actually that forms the basis of the book we're reading, and it's included in the back of the book we're reading. So it's, or at least an excerpt is. So it's a well-known text that Nat Turner authored and tells his story about his inspiration, especially specifically the voices from God that he was hearing. So when all was over, Turner escaped to the woods, dug a hole under some fence rails, and lived there for 6 weeks, coming out only at midnight for food. Driven thence by discovery, he still managed to hide there, and there about the plantation, in spite of a whole country of armed men in search of him, until at last he was accidentally confronted in the bush by a white man with a leveled rifle. He was hanged November 11th, and 16 others later. His wife was tortured for evidence, but in vain. 12 Negroes were transported. Very many were, without trial, punished in inhuman ways. The heads of some impaled along the highway as a warning. Partly in consequence of this horrible affair, originated a stout movement for the abolition of slavery in Virginia. This was favored by many of the ablest men in the Old Dominion, but they were overruled. What's interesting here too is what I was interested in about this particular account is the way that this puts a political context around this rebellion. So you notice how this is sort of noting that, and there's this narrative you hear often about the South that the South didn't really like slavery, that there were individuals in the South who were, they went along with slavery because they had to, but they knew it was an evil, but they were trying their best to stop it, but they were overruled. And this plays into some of the mythology around the Civil War and the conflicts, right? So the idea that the North had to come down and tell the South what to do is sometimes treated that way, as though the South were on its way to its own kind of reconciliation with slavery, but that it was the North didn't give them a chance. And so I think you see an element of that narrative here. Again, this is in 1894 or 1895 when this particular document that I'm looking at here was written. So this idea about the interpretation and meaning of the Civil War was still, and it, I guess currently still is, being debated and negotiated. But one of the interesting things was that in response to the well, let me read on a bit more here. So danger from the blacks necessitated the most rigid laws concerning them. So here again, it just very quickly turns into, that it was good that these able men of the Old Dominion were interested in abolition, and yet the blacks were this danger, like the danger from the blacks, like that was necessary, that we had to institute these laws to keep them safe. Time had been when it was thought not dangerous to teach slaves to read. In 1742, the Commissary Garden of the English Society for Propagating Gospel founded the Negro School in Charleston, where slaves were taught by slave teachers, these last being the society's property. So literacy becomes a threat, and religion becomes a threat, theology becomes a threat, and you'll see this idea of what you might even call a liberation theology in Nat Turner's writing about himself and his ideas about himself. He sees he sees himself as an agent of God, and so that's something to keep in mind as we read it. So one of the other interesting accounts I read, or stories I read about this period, had to do with how this event became politicized. As it mentions here, right, the response was much worse than the rebellion in terms of the total life lost. It doesn't name how many here, but it looked like, and some, of course, documents are hard to find in some cases, but one history I read about this said that over 200 black people were killed in response to this rebellion, whereas 55 or so white people were killed in the actual rebellion itself. And that includes North Carolina and Virginia. Also, one of the interpretations of the event theorized that Virginia slave owners had essentially become complacent about their slaves, even though the black population was much larger than the white population in some areas like Southampton, but the white slave owners perceived themselves as treating their slaves so well that they were happy, and there was no chance or no risks of an uprising. So when this uprising obviously happened, the governor at the time of Virginia, Floyd, I think, George Floyd, not George Floyd, I think it was John Floyd, it was Floyd, something Floyd. Anyway, he, obviously not George Floyd, that's ironic that slip of the tongue there, but Floyd, the governor, blamed Northern abolitionists for the rebellion. So he said that because people were writing pamphlets in Boston and other places advocating abolition, that had somehow motivated Nat Turner to lead this rebellion, where there's no evidence that Nat Turner had ever read any of those pamphlets or would have had any access to that kind of information. But this idea of like outside agitators led or helped increase the kind of isolationism of Virginia, and that was one of the forces leading to the Civil War. Okay, so I was really interested in contemporaneous accounts, so stories from when it happened, and there are pretty good archives of Virginia newspapers. So I found a couple. This is the Richmond Enquirer. I don't think it's still published, but it was published in 1831. I thought this was an interesting account. Actually, a very lengthy account of everything that was happening. Let's see, it's taking minutes to load here. I just, these old newspapers I find really interesting for lots of reasons. This one is very text heavy. Some of them, like the other one I'm going to share in a minute, was very had a lot of ads in it, and like the ads were for like really like stereotypically 19th century things like hats. Like there's lots of ads for hat makers, and I thought that was funny. But anyway, I'll show you that in a minute. But this one's pretty much an account of everything, and this is I thought this is the closest to the source that I could find. The events in question, the rebellion began August 21st, 1831. So this is August 30th. So this is not that long afterward, at least in terms of in time in the 19th century. And I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but I think it's pretty interesting the way it's written at the beginning. So it's linked in my slides, and I'll share the slides later if you want to look at it. It's really it's pretty cool. So much curiosity has been excited in the state, and so much exaggeration will go abroad, that we have determined to devote a great portion of this day's paper to the late strange events in the county of Southampton. We have therefore thought proper to extract from the compiler of Saturday and yesterday morning the details which are therein published. We cannot vouch for the accuracy of all of them, but they are the best which we have come to hand. We hope, if they have no other effect, that they will be at least calculated to correct 1,000 misrepresentations which are afloat. What strikes us as the most remarkable thing in this matter is the horrible ferocity of these monsters. They remind one of a parcel of bloodthirsty wolves rushing down from the Alps, or rather like a former incursion of the Indians upon the white settlements. Nothing is spared, neither age nor sex respected. The helplessness of women and children pleads in vain for mercy. The danger is thought to be over, but prudence still demands precaution. The lower country should be on the alert. The case of Nat Turner warns us. No black man ought to be permitted to turn a preacher through the country. The law must be enforced, or the tragedy of Southampton appeals to us in vain. It appears from General B's dispatches to be his opinion that 20 resolute men, fairly confronted in the daylight with these banditti, could have put them down. We have no doubt of it, but the alacrity with which our troops turned out, and the number which so quickly collected on the scene will have its effect hereafter. It will show how utterly hopeless is every attempt to do anything against the whites, and how surely much misguided wretches bring down ruin upon their own heads. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's take a little bit. The comparison of the slaves to animals as wolves, the threat of others, and the supremacy of white, the white settlements, the alacrity of the white soldiers, the inevitable alacrity of the white troops, right? This idea that, and also ultimately that this is the slaves, the uprising, the banditti, as it says, bringing down ruin upon their own heads. Like, this is just it's their fault. And there's a whole lot here. It's really interesting to look at. There's also, I found several other newspapers. They're in multiple tabs, so many tabs. Let's see, this one. Yeah, this one I just read. Oh yeah, so here's one. This is from the Richmond Enquirer, same newspaper in October. And this says, we understand by a letter from Fincastle that of the 12th inst, I don't know what inst means, that a Negro man named Billy, belonging to Mr. Kennelly, was arrested on the 10th, what is inst? I don't know what that means, on a charge of being concerned with Nat Turner in raising an insurrection in Botetourt County. So I was not familiar with Fincastle. I had to look it up. It's out there by Roanoke. So this is showing how far the paranoia had spread. And so the idea, the claim here, and this was a rumor basically that, this is this is published on October 18th. So this is while Nat Turner was still in hiding. There were several different rumors and claims of different people had claims to catch him at different points. There was a huge reward for him. So this was, apparently he was allegedly sighted in crossing the New River and was allegedly, I think he was shot allegedly, but it could be someone else, or it could have been someone just making up a story. But the point is just, it's something that was spreading lots of rumors around. Also, just, again, I find the newspapers from this era so interesting. Like, there's no organization to it. It's just like, let's put everything together. So here's this column here, and then here's a letter down below to the editor, and then a letter to the governor. And then right here, here's the program for the graduation ceremonies at Hampton-Sydney that year. And it's like, it's all these things stuck together. It's really interesting. Here's another one. This is let's see, which one is this? Yeah, the Genius of Liberty. Yeah, so that's Leesburg. I think this one just had the same accounts. You see a lot of them have the same. Yeah, this is the same, the Fincastle one, a different version of the story from Fincastle. Where is it? I had the Richmond Whig in one of these tabs, but I don't seem to have it anymore. Anyway, I think it's linked in my next slide, so I will move on to this one. So this was the capture of Nat Turner, and this was a report published in the Petersburg Intelligencer, which I can't find, but I have found several other newspapers reprinted the same story, and this was pretty common. So you would have a story, and then all the newspapers that belonged to the same publisher or just were nearby, they would trade stories, and so that they could fill up their pages basically. And this is telling the story of the capture, and that's the capture depicted in that wood engraving that I showed you a minute ago. This was just, like as I was mentioning, it's interesting that the front page, or maybe this is the back page, but anyway, there's all these ads, like, classified ads essentially, right? So here's a list of things that are for sale, but from the Lewis Webb Company. Here's the list of ships getting ready to sail from Richmond to New York or to Philadelphia. Then there's like St. John's hats. We just got a bunch of hats, and here's a supply of boots, and like, I don't know, here's somebody advertising music lessons, and someone selling fancy dry goods, and it's just interesting how it's all crammed together. But anyway, so this is interesting. This is telling the story about the different rumors, the different claims that people have made. This actually is the story of the This is reporting the actual capture, and notice the sense of palpable relief here. All right, so it is with much gratification we inform the public that the sole contriver and leader of the late insurrection in Southampton, concerning whom such a hue and cry has been kept up for months, and so many false reports circulated, the murderer Nat Turner has at last been taken and safely lodged in prison. So this is his, the actual story of the capture, and this was before he was executed. He was executed about a week later, so pretty quickly. And things happened pretty fast at the time. So he was, and let's see, is this the right tab? Nope. Oh boy, so many tabs. Yeah, here we go. So he was, before he was executed, he was interviewed by Thomas Gray, and Thomas Gray recorded his, what he said. He says this is pretty much word for word what Nat said about his, about what he did. And it's here on Project Gutenberg. This is, of course, it's a public domain document. It's published in 1831, I guess, or 1830, maybe 32 by the time it was actually published. But yeah, no, it says 1831. Things could be published pretty quickly, I guess. And this is his account. So what we're reading here are as close as we can get to the actual words of Nat Turner, and it's pretty detailed. And I think that's partly why we know so much about this event. We know so much about his motivation and his character, and so the personality of Nat Turner comes through in this document, and it informs Cal Baker's book as well as many other accounts of this rebellion. So he says things like, "Sir, you have asked me to give a history of the motives which induced me to undertake the late insurrection, as you call it. To do so, I must go back to the days of my infancy and even before I was born. I was 31 years of age, the 2nd of October last, and born the property of Benjamin Turner of this county. In my childhood, a circumstance occurred which made an indelible impression on my mind, and laid the groundwork of that enthusiasm, which has terminated so fatally to many, both white and black, and for which I am about to atone at the gallows. It is here necessary to relate this circumstance, trifling as it may seem. It was the commencement of that belief which has grown with me, and even now, sir, in this dungeon, helpless and forsaken as I am, I cannot divest myself of it. Being at play with other children when 3 or 4 years old, I was telling them something which my mother, overhearing, said it had happened before I was born. I stuck to my story, however, and related some things which went, in her opinion, to confirm it. Others, being called on, were greatly astonished, knowing that these things had happened, and caused them to say in my hearing, I surely would be a prophet, as the Lord had shown me things that had happened before my birth." And so this is why I think Cal Baker's book starts before Nat Turner is born, and we get to see events that certainly did happen, right? So the events that are depicted in Cal Baker's book before Nat Turner are in some cases imagined or drawn from other narratives, but they are there as an example of the kind of thing that Nat Turner, he doesn't specify what it is that he knew about, but he claims to have had this knowledge of things that he should not have had knowledge of, having not been born yet. And so when we see that in the book, you'll kind of see what that means. Okay, so that's that one. Oops, that's not the right tab. There we are. And oh yeah, so this idea of and depictions of Nat Turner are pretty interesting, and I wanted to show you just the trailer for this documentary. The whole thing, I did find the whole thing on YouTube, as it tends to go. I haven't watched it yet, but I think the trailer raises a really interesting question about Nat Turner, and it's something that I think would be interesting to look at as we read Cal Baker's book. So let me see. I'm gonna have to move my windows around to make sure that the audio comes through, and we'll see if it does it have captions? I think so. Okay. And I don't think audio is coming through. Oh, yeah, it is. Okay, I'll be quiet.
I heard a The murder of this family 5 in number, was the work of a moment. There was a little infant sleeping in a cradle that was forgotten until we had left the house and gone some distance when Henry and Will returned and killed it.
Over the next 24 hours, Nat Turner led a small group of slaves from farm to farm, killing every white man, woman, and child they encountered. They gathered guns and more recruits during a brief but bloody revolt that spread terror throughout the slave-holding South. Nat Turner was captured and hanged. In the days before his execution, he agreed to tell his story. But after his death, his words became the property of others, as his body was during his life. His story has been continually retold since 1831. He has been depicted as a great and inspiring hero and vilified as an insane fanatic. Each author possesses Nat Turner, transforming his identity and the meaning of his revolt. Although today we cannot clearly make out the face of the man, he continues to provoke a bitter debate over the violence that he inspired. For a nation unable to come to terms with the legacy of slavery, Nat Turner remains a troublesome property.
Okay, hopefully you could hear that, because I couldn't hear that, but I watched it before and I read the subtitles. The really interesting question there, I hope you noticed, is kind of captured in the title, a Nat Turner, a troublesome property. That title, of course, refers to his status as an enslaved person, like he literally was property, and that is troublesome. But also, as I note here, his words become other people's property in the way that they are retold through different versions. And what I think as far as I can tell, what looks like they're doing in this documentary is having different actors portray him and different, film different versions of the same events to encourage different interpretations of Nat Turner's his role and what his deal was, basically. This is something I'll watch the whole thing. It's an hour long. I'll probably watch it I'll try to watch it before class on Wednesday to see if it's worth sharing with the rest of you all. But you're welcome to check it out too, of course. And as you read, pay attention to this. Like, what kind of person is Nat Turner? And there are several possibilities that this little trailer here mentions. A kind of inspirational hero, perhaps a villain, a prophet, a scoundrel. There's so many things. For example, one of his main things that is consistent across all these different versions is that he feels inspired by God. He feels directly led by God. He feels that God has spoken to him directly and given him these instructions. And one of his confirmations of this is that he predicts a solar eclipse, and then it actually happens. And this is recorded that there was a solar eclipse. I think this was 1828. So there you can, the astronomical charts and such confirmed that there was a full annular solar eclipse in Virginia that year. So this is something that he saw as confirmation of his mission, and this is something that he had been planning for and preparing for years. So it's something to think about as you read this book, right? What do you think ultimately of Nat Turner? But also, what does Kyle Baker want us to think about Nat Turner as we read this book? So this is my last slide, but I can show you some images from the book to give you a sense of other things to look for as you read it. And do try to read it by Wednesday. It really doesn't take very long to read, partly because it's a lot of wordless images, and really not like this is a typical page in terms of density. There's really often just two or three, sometimes just one panel per page. So I find it does read pretty quickly. So this is the earlier part. Obviously, this is how it looks, and this is, I'm going backward here. So this is the preface. This is kind of the, sorry, I'm working my way backwards. Let me start at the beginning. So this is the cover, and I think it's a pretty striking cover. The image of the hand with the sword. The sword was kind of Nat Turner's signature weapon, and that he used. He actually only killed one person, which is something also to look for here, and that's something that comes up in the confession. That's something that what's his name, Gray, asked him about. Others that he motivated did most of the killing. Nat Turner himself only was responsible for one murder of his own. But you can see it here. You can see the blood, the background of the moon, perhaps invoking the annular eclipse that the full eclipse of the sun that he saw and took as a sign. And yeah, so we have some preface stuff here. Pay attention to the typography. I think this is also a really interesting image. It puts in the foreground literacy as part of the threat that Nat Turner comprised. We can just see his eyes here. Everything else is kind of in darkness. So it's a very sinister image, I think. But notice that that's the idea of a slave who reads as a threat. That's something that this book talked about here. That time had been when it was thought not dangerous to teach slaves to read. And so this slave rebellion is evidence of why, yeah, maybe it is dangerous, according to this historian and to people at the time. So I like how Kyle Baker puts that in the front as a way to satirize that threat, like as a way to say that this is all he's doing, he's just reading. But that's what gives him his clarity of thought that leads to his rebellion. Okay, so Nat Turner. Notice the typography. I mean, obviously this is contemporary typography, but it's made to look old-fashioned. It's made to look 19th century. I mean, you can tell it's a font because, like, if you look at the E and the E here, those are the same. They have the same distortions on both of those E's. So this is very clearly a digital font, but it's made to look like an old-timey letterpress font. And yeah, then we get this kind of preface here. And these events depicting slaves being captured and then transported across the ocean. These are perhaps the events that he had knowledge of. It doesn't actually say, but these could be the events that he had knowledge of without having been there. But in any case, they are events that could have happened and certainly could have. I'm flipping through this very quickly to get to a particular image here. One recurring thing you'll see is these images of the moon, the phases of the moon, indicating the passage of time. Again, referencing the time past. And yeah, here we go. So I just was blasting through some pretty important passages and images here, but just wanted to show you this other source. This is the memoir of Captain Theodore Conneaut, I think, 20 Years of an African Slaver. So the events depicted in the kind of first chapter here, while not directly from Nat Turner's confessions, are drawn from other historical documents. So they're not made up. This is not something that Kyle Baker is imagining, except in the sense that he's filling in some of the details based on the recorded history of these. So it's, as you saw, I kind of glossed through it quickly here, but as you can see, this is an incredibly violent book. There is a lot in it that is, or could be disturbing. And that's something else to keep in mind. It's true, though. I mean, these are events that really happened, and so we can talk about whether the artwork emphasizes that for shock value, or to help us, and if so, is that shock a shock we need to have? Like, is it a pedagogical kind of shock value? I think it is. I think there's ultimately, this is meant to horrify us about something horrifying, and so I think that's okay. I mean, I think that's its purpose. So I understand that. At the same time, I understand it could just be it is very disturbing. So I also understand it may be uncomfortable to talk about and certainly uncomfortable to read. But I do want us to try to talk about it. I want us to be able to talk about it. There's this idea that we need to bear witness to these kinds of traumatic events to acknowledge their horrors and understand how important it is to know and come face to face with really the original sin of America, like the slave trade that propelled the economy of the country in its early days, and it's something that we have to know about and come to terms with as citizens even today. So on that note, I'll wrap it up. Today is November 2nd. Tomorrow is November 3rd. So speaking of citizenship, I assume you have a plan to vote. If you have already, I assume you don't need me to tell you that election day is tomorrow. So, but I hope you do vote. I hope you have a chance to exercise your right to vote. It's important, and it's something that can make a difference. So please do that. Of course, we don't have class tomorrow anyway, so I didn't have a class to cancel tomorrow, but that is, anyway, I hope you have the opportunity to vote. I hope you figured that out already. If you vote locally, there are lots of places you can vote. I mean, there are lots of places you can find the information about what your precinct is and so on. But hopefully everything goes smoothly with that. I voted a couple weeks ago. It's kind of weird. I actually just, it was at the Stafford airport, so I had to drive all the way out there. There's hardly anyone there, and in and out in 5 minutes, very easy, but just kind of an odd location. I don't know why they did it there. But anyway, I'll wrap it up here. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see some of you on Wednesday, some more of you on Friday. Everyone else I'll see you online. Is Nat Turner this week, and I think, let me just look at what is our next book going to be. I think it's going to be Monsters next. Yes, okay, good. Next week we are going to start My Favorite Thing is Monsters, and we're going to spend 2 weeks on that because we will be interspersing that with finishing up the webcomic thing. So yeah, and then not much time left really. We've kind of crossed the midpoint of the semester, so it's pretty exciting. All right, cool. So, and I think I need to make accounts on the website for the X-Men, so I will do that. Maybe I already did, but I'll check. I think I did, but if not, I will do it today. So you can post your blog entries. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. I'm gonna go warm up. I'll see you later. Bye.